So I am very excited today to have a chance to catch up with my friend, Dr. Heather Wittenberg. And first of all, I want to say thank you to you for being willing to participate in an interview for Shine Your Light. So mahalo nui. Um, I've had the privilege of knowing Heather for many years as a fellow psychologist. Um, Heather has a nationally and internationally acclaimed website called babyshrink.com. And for any parents out there listening to this, I heartily recommend checking it out. She's absolutely brilliant. She's also a consultant on parenting issues to our own KITV TV here in Hawaii. And she also provides her expertise to publications like Parents Magazine and American Baby. She's a consultant, writer, and speaker for national organizations, and she has more on her resume than we could possibly cover in this interview. Suffice it to say, we're just grateful for her time to be here today. But the real reason I'm turning to Heather today is that she's also an activist, and she's determined to make a difference in our democracy. She's been as much of a dynamo in her activism as she has been in her career as a psychologist. And so I wanted to have her share some of her story today and her experiences in this arena. So without further ado, let's just jump right in, Heather. I usually start with, tell me a little bit, give me a little bit of background of how you felt drawn into this area. And if you want to talk about some of psychology as well as the activism, you feel free to do that. But we really want to hear what sort of pulled you down this path.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Ellen. And really what happened was, I had spent my lifetime peripherally involved in supporting candidates who are important to democracy. But I really was in the Obama bubble. I really believed things were pretty good. I didn't understand the depth of division in this country. Oh, and here's
oh, good, a photobomb. I love it.
This photobomber was actually, we adopted her as a rescue at one of our postcarding parties.
Oh, that's great.
That night, actually. So, she's
timing is perfect.
She's part of the story. I was in the bubble. I didn't get it about how bad things were and could get in this country and in the world. And I was merrily going along with having children and my career when the unthinkable happened in November 2016. And it hit me, I still feel, it's PTSD. I still feel that gut punch that so many of us woke up to. And I was further terrified when, the next day, I started looking around for local resources for what we could do politically to really help immediately. And I didn't find very much of anything. And I looked nationally and I didn't find very much of anything. And that scared the heck out of me. And I didn't sleep. And I was terrified for my children and for our country and for the world, that there, not only were we waking up, many of us who lived in that privileged bubble, waking up to that absolute nightmare, but to see that in many ways we had allowed it to happen, and that there wasn't a coherent response that was already there. So I knew pretty quickly I had to be, I had to give whatever I could to that effort. It took some months to put together, but that's how it started.
Got it. Thank you. And I think you just, I think, elucidated for so many of us the exact same experience we had waking up that next morning. And I know I, among many others, had several sleepless nights after that. seeing what that downstream picture was going to look like without any interventions and even with them. So thank you, because I think what you said encapsulates a lot of experiences for so many. Um, so I normally would say, when did you first feel sort of called down this path? So you sort of had some experience prior to 2016, but I think I'm hearing that was the major wake up call, as it was for many of us at that point. What, who and what would you say has inspired you over your lifetime to bring you to this point?
Well, I would say that before 2016, there certainly was a foundation laid down uh, to make it possible for me to get up and go once I heard that call. The foundation really came from well, I think a kind of unspoken message from my family that was that insisted that we do something useful and good and productive in the world with our lives. And I would say that as kind of a boiled down generic American uh, value, but it came from very different points of view in my background. My mom comes from a family that's been in the country since the 1600s, with Quaker and Episcopalian, and then more recently Unitarian uh, involvement and activist involvement in civil rights, as well as going back to the Civil War, anti-war activism in the
Wow.
American South,
Wow.
which is really cool to learn about. Um, in my on my dad's side, my dad came from orphan refugee parents from who escaped the pogroms of Eastern Europe, and really traumatized, multi-generational trauma from that Jewish experience. And it wasn't like, you got to be an activist. It was like, you got to be a professional and you have to be educated and you have to, as child of immigrant family in that way, you have to hustle and you have to work and you have to make a living and you have to work hard. And also just the knowledge that it was the unspoken knowledge that it was important to be good and useful. And then once once 2016, 2017 hit, by then I had had professional experience in organizing people and managing. So my professional skill set as a psychologist includes managing people in groups and programs. And so that was very useful to be able to, because so many of us came with that gut punch that you said, like, I got to help. And I was able to jump in and say, you're good at this, you're doing like assign jobs and bring people in and not figure all that out from scratch. So that helped a lot too.
Terrific. Now, maybe expand for us on the work you have been doing since 2016, the work you helped organize, and some of the stories I know you've got some wonderful stories of people that have inspired you in this process too. So feel free to share about what you've been doing and also what you've seen in others as well.
Well, at first, for many months, it was really a process of trying to see what opportunities emerged that looked like they were competent and worthwhile. Because, and now we're at the point where, flash forward, where we've got lots and lots of activist opportunities flying around. And now it's not so much trying to find something to do. It's a question of picking and choosing in a smart and strategic way, without being disorganized and kind of scrambled. At the beginning, it was more a question of finding some smart people who knew what they were doing, who were putting something together that made sense to me in terms of use of efforts of people who were starting to come together, who were going to work together with us. And That's how I came across the Sister District Project, which is 4 women attorneys, very bright, well, extremely, expertly trained attorneys, public defenders on a federal level, and like that, who gave up their careers for this, and who immediately threw themselves into the problem of gerrymandering and redistricting and state level legislative elections. Very smart effort. And so, and I know that you've heard me talk about them a lot before. So it started from there with their insights into what was most important, because it can be overwhelming very quickly to figure out what do we do, what do we not do, which is almost as important. How do we pick projects? What kind of projects fit our group the best? And where are our talents useful? And that's, you know, so many groups across the country that I've had the opportunity to meet with and talk with, and they all have such different characters and characteristics, and each one is unique. So finding what we're good at has been fun and interesting, and based on, some of the characters that you mentioned that I can talk about a little bit also.
Please. Thank you. Yes, absolutely. Tell us a little bit about that as well, because I know you've got some very inspiring stories.
By now, people generally know, sorry, the kitty is going to hit my computer here. By now, people generally know what I mean when I talk about postcarding. But, at the beginning, it was this idea, this novel idea of using very low-tech supplies and ideas to encourage people to get out the vote from afar.
Right.
From afar. Not, people were saying, oh, can we, do bake sales to get on a plane and go drive people to the polls in Georgia or whatever. And it was like, you know what, our money is a lot better spent by this postcarding project. And we were able to ultimately do over 50,000 postcards just last year for get out the vote efforts. But at the beginning, it was really a compelling idea very quickly. People understood it pretty quickly. And there are a lot of folks so we started hosting postcarding parties. And there was one at my house 10 feet away from here where I first met Catherine Wood, who came to one of those parties. And people would bring friends. It was friends of friends of friends like that. And we had an event one night, or fairly, middle 2017. And Catherine came up to me, and she was in her probably early 70s, had a little turban on, and you could tell she was maybe a cancer patient. And she said, I'm sorry to bother you, but I see everyone standing around and chit-chatting, and we'd do like a half hour of schmoozing before we would get down to work. She said, I don't have a half an hour to schmooze. If you'll forgive me, I had my chemo. I just came from the hospital from having my chemo, and I have 1 or 2 more good hours where I still feel good. So will you please put me to work? Will you mind if I don't socialize and just put me to work?
Oh,
and this little dynamo, Catherine just wrote her little heart out, thousands and thousands and thousands of postcards personally herself. She had splints on her wrists from carpal tunnel. She went in and out of chemotherapy and treatment. And she was this incredible inspiration to our group. She was a fixed income retiree, and she could write as long as we gave her stamps. So we started raising stamp money, and we had many, many other fixed income retirees just like Catherine who wrote their little hearts out and really changed the results on so many elections by encouraging people to get out to vote, because we won many of those elections that we wrote for by less than 100 votes.
Wow.
So by writing thousands and thousands of postcards, we know that the effectiveness rate is on a low end 1%.
Which is
so if we're writing thousands and you're getting 1%, we'll take it, and it's working. So Catherine, really was our inspiration. And I say was because she was able to survive through the inauguration of Biden. And then shortly thereafter, she passed. And so we miss her terribly. But what an inspiration. And to be able to meet and work with activists like that has been really one of the best parts of this whole journey.
Thank you for sharing that. You know, part of the reason we started Shine Your Light was to encourage people to understand that no matter what they consider their restrictions to be, there are things that they can do to make a difference. And her story is, I think, one of the loveliest to share. No matter what you consider the impediment in life to be, there's a way for you to shine your light anyway. So thank you so much for sharing that. That's, I think, particularly inspiring for us.
It's a really important um, message to highlight, because so many people, like-minded people, think in terms of protests, showing up at protests, and that's it, or writing a check, and that's it. You know, my own mom, who was very active in Vietnam War protests, and drove people across the border to Canada who had their draft number come up and stuff like that. She was like, "I'm too old for protests. I feel terrible. I can't." And I said, "Mom, you don't need to carry signs and protests. There's lots you can do.
Mhm.
Don't feel like you have to do that. That's the only important thing." And indeed, we found that with showing up at protests, fine, good, show up at the protest. But in a way, we almost looked at it as an entry-level form of activism.
I
That
think,
people who would show up to the protests, they're like-minded. We try to get their email, get them on our list, and say, "Look, this is what we're doing if you're interested." And then they'd show up and they'd work. So there is something for everyone. Absolutely.
yes. And then a pandemic hit, and we had to come up with some other strategies too. Going out there to be like cheek to cheek with people protesting was not such a good option after a certain point. So, yeah, you're right.
Well, in fact, the pandemic, as horrible as it's been, really forced us to rethink how we were doing everything. And we went from, so, we used to gather in person for these postcard parties, and we would maybe crank out 500 at one event. But we had to transition to pick up and drop off, people, doorstep delivery and like that forms of postcarding. So people started doing it on their own, and our productivity shot through the roof. We would sometimes do, we had some months where we did 10,000 postcards
Oh,
during the pandemic individually. So it was unreal to be able to manage that kind of growth and that kind of productivity. Everybody was at home with all this time on our hands, and it's like, give me something to do.
that's fabulous. Isn't it funny? In some ways it turns out for the better. Just when we think things are getting worse, there are some, there's a light in there that somehow comes through. That's really a neat story to know that productivity actually increased.
Yes.
Um, I know that that people watching this, we always try to ask because we understand burnout. Certainly as psychologists, we understand burnout. And sometimes just looking at all the possibilities that you mentioned earlier, trying to figure out what to do, and then all of the places we can go and things we can do, sometimes it's hard finding that balance so that we're taking care of ourselves and at the same time doing what we can to make a difference. So I want to ask you what you personally do to try to maintain the balance. You've got 4 kids. You do a whole lot on the psychology side of your career. So tell us a little bit about what you do for self-care and taking care of yourself.
Well, that's a hard lesson for a productive person who comes from sort of the, get to work, kid kind of background that so many of us do come from, to now be in my 50s and to be forced to not have that degree of productivity that I've been able to have to crank out in the past, and to really think long and hard about what my priorities are and how to best manage my time. And to, one of this is maybe a little bit wonky for us psychologist types, but I know that you'll understand what I'm talking about when I say that for myself, I really started to understand that there's a dark underbelly to the notion of being a productive person and even an activist. And that dark underbelly is the sense that I'm omnipotent and I can do it all. And that's not good for anybody. So that is something that hit me square in the face in terms of just my energy level and my health over the past few years. And so I've really had to sort of put myself on sabbatical, work-wise, and really be mindful about how I can best use my time, because I knew I had to throw everything I could at this election. And I know that the 2022 midterms coming up are incredibly important as well. We don't, our work has not stopped and is essential going forward. But at the same time, just across the board, people are feeling really wiped out and exhausted. And that's important to mind people's energy levels going forward. That's part of managing people and myself as well. And to figure out the difference for all of us, there's so much the pull of anxiety and fear versus what's a productive project to follow. So, it happens on a regular basis where one of us who helps run the group will text each other, "Oh my God, did you see, on Rachel Maddow talking about this horrendous thing they're doing now, and we got to do something, and we've got to," and everybody gets all anxious and stressed out and feels like we got to scramble and do stuff. And then we sort of calm down and say, well, gee, what the heck can we do about, there's so many things, and it doesn't help anybody for us to be scrambled and to just be grabbing everything and running around like chickens with our heads cut off. People need to get healthy and to get their vaccinations and to pick up all the pieces that were left behind from the pandemic and the election and all that. And it's a retrenching time. So, our donors are giving us the money so that I just got 12,000 new custom printed postcards loaded into my postcard closet, and building up stamp supplies and looking at our email list and trying to figure out our priorities. So there's a lot to do in a much mellower way right now. And just trying to remind myself that this has to be a sustainable effort. And I, so many times in these last several years, I've gotten so much guidance from looking to Black women activists who've been there way longer than me and who know what they're doing and who know how to manage their time better. They're not out there, working themselves so that they can't keep working. They know what to take seriously and what to say no to. And, people like Stacey Abrams and so many others that I just try to learn from, because I know, again, that I'm not good to anybody if I'm burnt out and exhausted. And so managing that is a daily practice that I'm not always great at, but I'm working on it.
And staying conscious of it is the trick in many instances, because we get so pulled in, like you said, due to the things that show up on media, thinking, oh my gosh, we have to do, but you are so right. We have to find the balance. And speaking of that, I always harken back to an idea about choirs. When they have to hold long notes, they stagger breaths. And this is, so when somebody needs to take a breath, the other one keeps holding the note. And I think this is how we look at this. And so speaking of that idea, I know for our Indivisible group, they quickly latched on to being able to help with postcards for the sister district puzzle because it is something low tech, easy to do. If there are people listening to this who want to help, particularly those in Hawaii, but we do have listeners everywhere around the world and certainly on the mainland US. If they want to help with Sisters District postcarding, who would you like for them to contact? How should they best reach out?
Well, I want people to understand that the lay of the land in terms of activist groups is very much like the progressive, liberal, democratic leaning movement in general. It's like herding cats. It's all over the place. We've got all sorts of groups. And the activist groups that I've been fortunate to get in touch with and to meet and learn more about all over the country are all like we are. And by that, I mean, we're all taking projects from several groups. So Sister District is what I look to as a group that does the really incisive, in-depth research on where our priorities need to be on state ledge, and to pull us away from the constant distraction of national level elections, and to point out it all starts on a state level, and the bang for your buck and for your effort is really incredibly powerful on a state level. And if you uh, if you read about how the GOP groups like ALEC um, and others have really mastered gerrymandering, it all starts at state ledge levels.
Mhm.
So learning deeply about that and why those should be our priorities, I get that information from Sister District. They also point out really wonderful candidates across the board when the time comes. So I'm always looking at their emails for that. Once in a while, there are postcarding or phone banking opportunities, but they really shine in terms of fundraising and awareness of these candidates. They're not heavy on postcards. The uh, other groups, Postcards to Voters and Postcards for America, eh, their Swing West is another group that have postcarding opportunities. But these are all volunteer. They're not even like nonprofits. They're just people doing it and saying, oh, we need to buy this voter list. We need $500. Can we, get some money so we can buy this voter list? And that's where you get the addresses from. It's very very low tech, and also very subject to change. So we do our best to keep our finger on the pulse of who's doing postcarding and who's doing smart postcarding, because a lot of times these lists can become out of date. And you don't want to waste your activists' time and energy on out of date address lists. So there are 2 or 3 groups that that we keep in touch with, that we feel are very strong with their technology and how they do the postcarding. And we let people know about that through our newsletter. So people are more than welcome to join our newsletter. And if they want to send me an email, they can send it to me at heatherfromhawaii@gmail.com. heatherfromhawaii@gmail.com if they want to join our email list. And we don't bombard people with emails. It's just because we're all volunteers too.
Right, right.
But when we find good opportunities and we start latching on to an idea, then we start sending information out. And we're doing this and we're doing that, and if you want to be involved. So it's really a process of trying to stay abreast of what everybody's doing and what makes sense. And that takes up a lot of my time, trying to figure out what do we do, because there's not it's not laid out for us. And that's one of the drawbacks of not being a Republican, because the Republican side, they have everything, big money, everything laid out. This is what we're doing, guys, and everybody does it. But we've got all sorts of semi-related groups that all want the right thing, and all have to figure out how to work together without money and without structure and organization. So trying to make that happen is a lot of what is necessary to make it valuable. And so that's where that stands for now.
Okay, and thank you for doing that legwork for the rest of us, so we know we can turn to you to find out what does give us the best bang for our buck. We appreciate that very, very much.
It's food for
Um,
me.
what goals would you say you have going forward from here?
It's really, this experience over the last several years has really shown me how it's made explicit what I only had sort of implicit all these years, which is that it's important to me to, whether it's in my professional life or in my activism life, in my personal life, it's important to me to be involved in uh, activities that help others, and as not not you know I, in some of the consulting work that I've done, I've had the opportunity to interact with big corporations, and I've worked, of course, with lots of nonprofits over the years, and then in the activism world, and there's just no comparison in being involved with work that positively impacts other people's lives. And to have that opportunity to do it is really important going forward. So to the extent that we are going to have some major political challenges facing this country, which we are, I know that this is going to be a lifelong process for me. And it's been an important process for me for getting our kids involved as well, having them help at every step, of the way, with whether it's schlepping boxes and putting stamps on postcards or whatever it is. Um, Discussing with their friends in school sometimes, or online, somebody will say something uninformed or dumb or mean, about other people that they don't understand, and how to help them talk through those situations with other kids. Um, all of this goes forward. This doesn't, the work doesn't stop. And I think that that's another message that I take from the other activists who have been there for such a long time before me, before us, which is that this is a lifestyle, this is a way of life, this is an important way of living one's life, and it's way more work than I can accomplish on my own. So working together with others going forward is the general plan, and I don't feel a choice. I feel that that's just necessary.
Mhm. You brought up, I think, one theme that's been running through here that you put out there. I think for some, it may at first feel disheartening to think this is a work we have to continue for the rest of our lives. But we really were living in a bubble. Democracies are fragile. We had an unrealistic belief that ours was above all of that, that it would never be at risk. And we've had to learn the hard way that every democracy is at risk if people don't put efforts to sustain it. So it is a lifetime work for all of us. So yes, pace ourselves, but yes, commit to doing our best to preserve it for our lifetimes.
And the faith traditions understand that. The faith traditions don't say, "Hey, everything's great, guys, have a party." you Traditions of faith say uh, times will be hard, and we have to help each other, and people suffer, and it is important to always do what we can to help alleviate that suffering. They don't say that suffering doesn't exist. They say suffering will always exist, and we have to do our best to help those who are suffering, and to take care of ourselves when we're suffering, so that we can continue to help others. So, that's an important component that you're providing for people, because it's we need the long-term sustenance and support, and understanding that this isn't some kind of weird anomaly of human life. This is the human condition. And here now my kitty, this is not a kitty condition, it's a human condition. She's playing with the computer and I don't want her to knock it down. And you know, to understand it as a feature, not a bug, you know, of life, that this is what we do, is helps me to pace myself too, and to realize that this is how it is, this is how it's going to be, and this is not something to, you know, freak out about. This is just, this is life, and I see it more clearly now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And thank you for bringing that up about faith traditions. We do know that's part of our work, is to help others in this process. So I love that. Any last words that words of wisdom you'd like to share with us today?
Well, I mean, there's one of the questions on activists' minds these days is something that I think I can share some insight into. And we talked about this a little bit earlier, but just the notion of how do you get people involved who can be involved but who won't, or who, you know, how do you bring people together? How do you attract them and interest them? Because sometimes now, like a time like now where we've had this election and things are improving and people are not as involved, how do you keep momentum going? And what I have just really found is that going back to the membership that shows up, that keeps showing up, and who they are and what they're able to provide, what they want to provide, is far more effective than introducing projects out of nowhere that aren't organically kind of interesting and related to the people who are showing up. Because we have, you know, periodically someone will say, well, let's do this or let's do that. And it's a great idea. But for whatever reason, it's not something that we're getting natural interest in from the membership, other than, sure, that's something that you guys as managers should do for us.
Good point. Yeah.
And if I say, this is a great idea that somebody shared with us, who would like to help to run this? And then somebody grabs it and has energy and ideas, then we're going with that. But if people all just sort of look back and say, yeah, that's a great idea for you to do, then I know that we're waiting on that one, because I don't want to get stuck in that omnipotent thing. And I don't want to get stuck in the thing of everything sounds like a good idea, so we have to do a little bit of everything, because there will always be too many good projects. There will always be too many people in need. There will always be too many projects to sign on to. So again, looking for the energy that's coming from the membership and the people that show up and what they want to do and what they're interested in has been a great way of ensuring the sustainability going forward and the energy going forward. Because now that I've done that several times, I can grab someone and say, hey, I need to take some, I can't do this, can you do this? And you know, we share the load that way. And we know what our people will respond to and what they'll be interested in and what they won't be interested in. So that's unique to every group. And I just really encourage people to think about that for sustainability going forward, because we're all so desperately needed. And the most incredibly creative, wonderful ideas have come across in that way. And I'll just share one quick example of that from some activist friends that I met who are way out in rural Vermont. So there is a group that I met in rural Vermont, and they're very smart, interesting, wonderful people. And they're in Vermont, and they're like us. They're not deep pocket donation people. They just want to do something that makes sense. And because they're in Vermont, it's cold, and people like soup. And they had a bunch of people who can cook, and in particular moms who are home with little kids. And so what they did was they started cooking soup on a regular basis and having people sign up for a soup subscription. And they would take turns making huge things, all organic, like these wonderful. And they had a guy who had this country store with a special fridge, and like he was going to donate the fridge, and somebody had the vegetables and somebody had the recipes and whatever. And they take turns, and people sign up for a soup subscription. So every week or whatever, you pay X amount of dollars and you go to that country store that everybody goes to, and they get their soup. And this sounds like an adorable little bake sale kind of idea. They've raised like $75,000 so far.
Oh my gosh.
For these sister district candidates.
Wow.
The soup subscription people in Vermont are unbelievable. They're just cranking out their soup, and they have funded so many campaigns on their soup. And it was because they sat down and said, well, I got a fridge. What do you do with the fridge? Like, I don't know. Like, so they put this idea together. And so this is how an idea like postcarding happens. Even though we're not deep pocketed money people, we can raise money if we come up with an idea like that. And it's just as an inspiration. I mention it as inspiration because there's really an unlimited amount that we can accomplish if we get creative and put on our thinking caps and use the resources that we have that are unique to where we are. So just to mention that for everyone.
Oh, thank you. And it was your summary of thinking about that organizationally was brilliant. It was very helpful for me because with our group, we have the same thing. We have wonderful, wonderful ideas, but just more ideas than what people can do. So you're right. We have to think very carefully and strategically and inspirationally. What inspires us? That's where the energy is going to come.
Absolutely. That's when people show up and really come up with the incredibly creative part.
Yes. Well, Heather, I can't thank you enough for taking time today for sharing your wisdom and your experience that all of us can learn from. So with that, we'll let you go. I know you've got a busy day ahead of you, but thank you again. We're so grateful for you sharing your wisdom with us.
Thank you for what you're doing, Ellen, and thank you for including me. And I look forward to working together on into the future.
You bet. We shall do that indeed. Take care. Aloha.